So this is a study that I've been thinking about for a couple years now, and we replicated it both here in Nebraska and with some friends of mine, some PhDs in plant pathology, great turf pathologists, Jim Kearns and Dr. Lee Butler, both of them at NC State. And it all came from this idea that we noticed that brown patch on tall fescue lawns seems to be worse when the lawns are really deficient in fertilizer and not growing. I go around my neighborhood and I see it's a newer neighborhood, some of these lawns are, single-digit years old on top of pretty bad subsoil, and they're not fertilizing in the summer. Why? Well, a lot of early extension advice said high amounts of fertilizer in the summer leads to more brown patch. Who's heard that before, right? A lot of hands. Where did that initially come from? Colonial bentgrass fairways. We grow on colonial bentgrass lawns? No. But there was some research here, even in Nebraska, that showed tall fescue that was already growing pretty healthy. If you put more fertilizer on it, you got more brown patch, okay? So the growing thought was, don't fertilize in the summer, because in July, when the brown patch pressure is really high, and we had some great brown patch here in July, because we don't want to put any fertilizer down because it's going to make it worse. So what happens when we put nitrogen fertilizer on lawns? What's the most obvious thing that happens? It grows. It grows faster, right? So my question's always been, if you put more fertilizer down and it grows faster, you're supposed to get, the textbook says you get more brown patch. But our observations from Nebraska and all the way through transition zone into the Carolinas are that the grass that's growing the slowest, especially in these areas with poor soils and are under-fertilized, and they're in new lawns, have the worst brown patch. So the observations weren't aligning with what the books were saying and the early research was saying. The problem is, how do you put down a study and look at brown patch? You're going to put different levels of fertilizer down. And so the researchers would do that. You'd put down different levels of fertilizer. You'd look at how much brown patch was there and say, look, at more fertilizer led to more brown patch. But the question was, how much growth did we get out of it? And was there growth differences? So I really wanted to isolate the growth rate side from the fertilizer side. How fast is the grass growing versus how much nitrogen is in the tissue? And the way we can do that is mix our fertilizer rates with plant growth regulators. So I can manipulate growth rate regardless of how much fertilizer I'm putting down on the grass. So in this study, we have 4 reps, and you notice lots of different colors and different growth rates. So we have equivalent to 0 fertilizer applied, of half of a pound a month, and a pound a month from urea, 2 applications. And you might say, well, I'm not using urea and I'm using more than a pound at one time. Yeah, you might use a control product that's going to give you a pound, and it might have a slow release characteristic. So we're just spoon feeding here so we get a nice even response, so never have a huge surge or bust in growth rate. And then across those 3 fertilizers, I have 3 different PGR treatments. One is Primo Max at a ½ ounce per 1,000, or 20 ounces per acre. The other one, and so Primo Max makes the grass grow slower because it inhibits this hormone called gibberellin. Gibberellin makes grass grow. The other treatment is this applied gibberellin. So now I can make the grass grow faster without putting fertilizer down. And then the third treatment is just no PGR. So what did we find? The most striking result, and if you look especially at some of these plots here that have the PGR, they have a different color to them, they're very slow growing, they have the most brown patch, especially in July when the pressure was most severe. So the grasses that are growing very slow have brown patch. Then as you go to the normal growing grass with no PGRs, we see that as we increase nitrogen fertilizer, we see a small increase in the brown patch. But even the no PGR with a pound of fertilizer a month had half as much brown patch as the ones with the plant growth regulator, okay? And it's not the PGR that's doing it, it's the growth rate. The growth rate is so slow that it's not growing. And so it's not recovering from the disease. The pathogen is just ravaging those leaves and it's not growing out of it. There is a small fertilizer effect with the PGRs. So of all the Primo treatments, the ones with no fertilizer had a little bit less brown patch than the ones that got a pound of nitrogen per month with Primo. but the amount of increase was pretty negligible compared to just the other treatments. The plots that have 0 PGR, we see a small, it's significant, but it's not a huge increase in brown patch as the growth rate and the fertilizer levels increase. And then the plots that are getting straight gibberellin, so they're growing like crazy. You can see some of them. They're really light green and they're just bolting out of the ground. Those ones, the fertilizer effect didn't matter. There's no difference in brown patch across any of those. Why? Because the grass is already growing so fast that the tissue nitrogen levels aren't even that different from each other, because the grass is growing so fast that we're mowing that fertilizer off so rapidly, there's no differences. So what are the take-home points in this study? The take-home point is we need to think about managing growth rate and not managing just how much fertilizer goes down. If you have a lawn that's already growing rapidly, or you have roughs or a field that's already growing rapidly, any extra fertilizer you put onto it is going to increase brown patch slightly. But if it's summertime and that grass is already growing very slowly, fertilize it. We need to stimulate some growth so that leaf can be mowed off and it's not just being, destroyed by this pathogen. So how much growth do we need? Rough estimates based on these two locations, when we're at about 1.5 inches of growth a week, that's where we need to be growing at. If it starts growing faster than that, or the tissue levels start becoming higher and higher nitrogen, we have slightly more brown patch. But if you have less than about 1 inch of growth a week, the brown patch levels double to nearly triple. We have a ton of brown patch. So think about growth rate. And you might say, well, I'm not putting Primo down on my lawn, so then I should, the lower fertilizer rate's appropriate. Well, sure, but again, it's not the Primo causing this problem. It's just slow growth. So what else causes slow growth? Really low levels of water, compaction, poor soils, soils that have very low organic matter in them to break down and release fertilizer in the middle of summer. All of those situations are going to be slow growing and can really benefit from fertilizer and from things like aeration and compost, stuff that's going to improve the soil so that we have that growth rate of about 1.5 inches a week. If you're doing 1.5 inches a week and you're mowing at 3 inches, the 1/3 rule would be perfect, right? So that should be kind of the goal at a 3-inch lawn. If you're mowing at an inch and a half a week, well then you might have to mow twice a week so you're not violating the 1/3 rule, which we've shown it really is the best way to mow. So think about growth rate and not just how much fertilizer is there. If the grass is growing slowly, fix that situation. Maybe it's low organic matter, it's compaction, or it's just low soil fertility. But if it's already growing rapidly, then yeah, extra fertilizer might stimulate too much growth and we can see a small increase in brown patch. It's a little contrary to kind of what the textbook would say maybe, or the extension circulars, but I think it's something that we've all experienced, right? You go to your clients and you see a new client in the middle of summer and their yard is overwatered and full of crabgrass and there's brown patch everywhere. And what do you guys want to do? You want to fertilize it, right? Bring it back. And the homeowners get scared. No, I'm going to get even more brown patch. It's going to kill it. It's going to burn it. No, we need some fertility there to get our growth rates where they need to be. So think growth rate and use our fertilizer and our cultural practices to achieve our growth rate goals.